With FX's Shogun having wrapped up to critical acclaim, now is as good a time as any for the team at Kings and Generals to offer our final opinion on the series as a portrayal of history. Both critics and viewers have praised this one-season wonder, but as a history channel, reviewing the series' cinematography is out of our scope, so we will instead focus on whether medieval Japan is portrayed historically accurately, and what historical inaccuracies can be found within its world. Before we embark on this journey, it should be borne in mind that since Shogun's total runtime is over 10 hours long, there will be details that we have missed or didn't include due to our own video's time restraints. With that said, let's dive deep into the world of Shogun. And beware, spoilers lie ahead. And if you're a fan of Japanese history, you should watch our series on the Russo-Japanese War and the Pacific War by becoming a patron or YouTube member via our links in the description and pinned comment. You will also be able to watch our series on the fall of Sparta, First Punic War, Italian reunification wars, Albigensian Crusade, history of Prussia, biography of Sulla, Reconquista, World War II North African campaign, Persian Wars, War of Spanish Succession, and much more, alongside other perks. Thanks to our YouTube members and patrons for supporting us. Shogun is based on the 1975 novel by James Clavell, which itself is loosely based on real history. Many of its main characters, like Yoshii Torinaga, John Blackthorne, and Toda Mariko, are based on real people: Tokugawa Ieyasu, William Adams, and Hosokawa Gracia, respectively. That being said, most of the events in the story are either entirely fictional or are inspired by real ones but significantly altered. This isn't a problem, however, since the series never tries to depict history with one-to-one accuracy, and makes itself clear that it is historical fiction, not historical fact. On the other hand, the show does exceptional work in its depiction of Sengoku-era Japan, with clothes, armor, ideas, and customs generally portrayed faithfully. As the first episode begins, we are greeted with the arrival of Blackthorne in Japan, aboard the Dutch ship Erasmus, the show's counterpart of William Adams' ship, the Liefde. A squad of samurai and ashigaru welcomes the Erasmus, and we are more than happy to see them carrying firearms, which by that point in time had become a staple in Japanese warfare, regardless of how many times movies will tell you the samurai found them dishonorable. Their armor is dyed a shade of blue, and this is something we see with the soldiers of other clans as well later. During the Sengoku period, some clans, like the Takeda and Ii, had their troops dressed in a certain color to help distinguish themselves from the enemy, instill fear, or promote a sense of camaraderie within their ranks. The show cleverly uses this, perhaps to a greater extent than real life, to help the viewers distinguish which soldiers belong to which clan. Next, we are also introduced to the character of Yoshii Torinaga and the political background of the story, the Council of Regents. Just like in history, the council rules the land until the Taiko's son comes of age, but the show deviates from real history in who is on the council. In the show, we see the counterparts of real-life Otani Yoshitsugu, Kanishi Yukinaga, and of course Ishida Mitsunari, who in the show is named Ishido and serves as the main antagonist of the story. It is during the first council meeting that the show introduces us to one of its great themes, honor. Tadayoshi, who feels that his lord Torinaga has been insulted by Ishido, draws his blade, but after realizing his mistake, he offers to commit seppuku and end his bloodline as an apology. This is historically authentic, as there was a law in Japan forbidding anyone from drawing a sword in Edo Castle or in the presence of shogunal emissaries, and for the show, the same law seems to apply in Osaka Castle. It's also important to notice here that Tadayoshi outran the legal system by offering to unalive himself instead of waiting to be officially sentenced to death, which showcases his impulsive and honor-driven personality. Seppuku, the act of ritual suicide, is a heavy theme in both the show and the book, so let us discuss how it is presented compared to how real-life samurai practiced it. Tadayoshi was the first of a litany of characters in Shogun who danced with this fate. By the end of the first episode, we also see Yabushige turning his own blade against himself rather than let the waves claim him. While not strictly speaking a seppuku, this act is in line with its spirit, which is self-determination even in death. A few episodes later, we see a young Torinaga acting as a kaishakunin, a man doing the beheading for a defeated daimyo. As the characters mention, The decision of the defeated daimyo to choose the then 12-year-old Toranaga as his second was a very stupid decision, for it took the boy 9 cuts to get through the neck, making a big mess in the process. On the other hand, this decision could perhaps have been aimed at humiliating boy Toranaga, as failure to produce a single clean cut would bring great shame upon the man. The cut is difficult because of the bone, and certainly not something a young and inexperienced child would have been capable of delivering, confirmed by the show's characters as they reminisce on the event. Armed with this knowledge, we wonder what Blackthorn, who has no experience with katanas, was thinking when he tried to step in as Mariko's second during her attempted seppuku in episode 9. However, we are now getting ahead of ourselves. By far the most tragic and interesting example of seppuku in the series is that of Hiramatsu, who takes his own life in protest of Toranaga's decision to surrender. This is one of the voluntary forms of seppuku, called kanshi. The greatest historical example of this is probably that of Hirate Masahide, a loyal Oda samurai who ended his own life in order to force Nobunaga to be more responsible. We should note here, however, that Hiramatsu was at least implied to have caught on to Toranaga's plan, and still sacrifices himself to make the ruse more believable among Toranaga's allies, and more importantly, his enemies. Of course, the most impactful seppuku scene in the series was Mariko's attempt in episode 9, which was prevented at the last moment by Ishido. It is well documented that women of the Bushi class would also perform ritual suicide, mostly to avoid capture. But while Mariko aims her blade at her heart, the typical way that women committed the act was by slicing their jugular vein, achieving a quick death with no second needed like in seppuku. There is also the problem of Mariko being a Catholic and suicide being considered a great sin in the Christian faith, which is why Mariko also requires an assistant. On these grounds, Mariko's historical counterpart, Hosokawa Gracia, was also blocked from killing herself and instead was killed by one of her clan's retainers. Finally, we have Yabushige's seppuku in the last episode. What is interesting in his case is not the execution itself, but that he begs for a death penalty that was reserved for common criminals, not samurai. By ordering him into seppuku, Toranaga is basically doing him a favor by allowing him to keep his honor after death, but Yabushige rebukes this by asking for a more gruesome death. Perhaps it was a last-ditch effort at a bluff in order to convince Toranaga he has truly come around. Or perhaps Yabushige's fascination with novel ways to inflict human suffering is so complete that he would even see it experimented with upon himself. Incidentally, Yabushige's actions in the final episode, where he boils a man of Blackthorn's crew, was a penalty that happened historically in Japan. Also in the first episode, we see the death of an unlucky Christian peasant at the hands of Kashigi Omi, Yabushige's nephew, seemingly for no reason and with no consequences. While the samurai did have the right to strike down people of lower social classes when they felt offended, it wasn't without consequences, as the authorities would launch an investigation into the matter, and the samurai could very well find himself held accountable for murder and also face capital punishment. However, in the case of Omi, we see the only power above him in the village is his uncle, so he can get away with it. Rather extreme and a bit ahistorical is also Blackthorn's reaction to the Jesuit priest during his interrogation. Don't get us wrong, Protestants and Catholics were at odds at the time, and there certainly would be little love lost between them. But for Blackthorn to say, "your God" or "my God," and to stomp on the cross is certainly an extremity. Especially the latter, since the cross is a sacred symbol across all Christian denominations, and there is no way a Christian would do such an act. Speaking of Christians, let us take a moment to properly examine the character of Toda Mariko. Mariko, who has converted to Catholicism, is tasked by her lord Toranaga to act as the interpreter between Blackthorn and most of the Japanese caste. We see her enjoying some relative freedom for a married woman of her class, but that likely comes from the mission she had been tasked with by Toranaga himself, which is interesting because, technically speaking, women didn't have feudal lords. Instead, they had to be fully loyal to and obey their husbands. Thus, we have to assume Buntaro doesn't want to go against his lord on that matter, because as we later see, he is not exactly okay with Mariko being so close to Blackthorn. In the third episode, we are also introduced to Mariko's abilities as a fighter. and we see that she has been trained in the use of naginata since childhood. While the idea of women fighting might come off as strange, it was not in fact uncommon for women of the bushi class to be trained in combat, often favoring the naginata as a weapon of choice. In the next episodes, we see her accompanying Blackthorn to Ajiro as he becomes Hatamoto, a title with which the real William Adams was also rewarded. Mariko's greatest hour comes during her defiance in Osaka, when she attempts to leave the castle with the goal of setting off a chain reaction that will result in the rest of Ishido's hostages being set free as well. While her attempt is unsuccessful at that moment, her conviction, and later her death, earns her sympathizers, even among the Council of Regents and Lady Ochiba, the show's counterpart of Yododono, the mother of the heir. Her death is the catalyst that sets things in motion. Ishido is forced to let the hostages go, losing his grip on the disaffected members of the council and his alliance with Ochiba. Consequently, as the show tells us, he will ultimately stand weakened when his and Toranaga's forces finally clash at Sekigahara. Mariko's sacrifice in the show is not unlike that of her real-life counterpart, Hosokawa Gracia. When Ishida Mitsunari took over Osaka Castle in 1600, he attempted to take hostages from members of the families of various powerful generals, including Gracia, who was married to Hosokawa Tadaoki, and whose political allegiance was leaning towards Tokugawa Ieyasu. Rather than allowing herself to be taken hostage, Gracia ordered one of her husband's retainers to kill her, or perhaps the man had been ordered in advance by Tadaoki to do so in case his wife's integrity was in danger. The result was all the same. Her death triggered an uproar and forced Mitsunari to abandon his plan, which significantly impacted his position, as many generals openly declared for Ieyasu, while others harbored plans to switch sides in secret. Since we are on the subject of Mariko's sacrifice, we can't help but talk about the cause of her death, the infamous Shinobi raid. Not even Shogun was able to escape the stereotypical portrayal of the Shinobi, though in all fairness, it could have been worse. Comparatively, the ninja stereotypes in Shogun are toned down, and their attempt to kidnap Mariko is portrayed more as a raid by men wearing black overalls, rather than a fiesta of shuriken and smoke bombs. However, the show does have a rather realistic example of a shinobi, though it never calls him by that title. This character is none other than Mureji, who is revealed to be not just a spy, but a samurai under the service of Toranaga, who has taken the appearance of a humble peasant and even converted to Christianity and learned Portuguese in order to infiltrate those circles. But before we end the video, let us say a few words about stuff we haven't touched upon yet. First of all, the appearance of the characters. We must reiterate that the armor shown is period accurate, with uniform colors understandably chosen to help the viewers. Everyday clothing and kimonos are also on point, and even hairstyles are also quite accurate. There's a lot of diversity in men's hair and beards, with young samurai having a shaved pat or full long hair, and some samurai going clean-shaven, while others grow out their beards. This is accurate for the period, as the chonmage, the characteristic samurai hairstyle we see in many movies, series and anime, had not yet become mandatory for all samurai. That would happen later in the Edo period. Still, we failed to notice a samurai who actually took care of himself and had a proper chonmage. Next, let us discuss the appearance of the Westerners and how they are portrayed. The Portuguese merchants and the Jesuits play an important role in Blackthorn's journey, especially its early parts, not to mention that communication between Anjin and the others happens theoretically in Portuguese, which is depicted as English in the show for the audience's convenience. Through Blackthorn and the priests, we get glimpses of the reality of the Portuguese trade in Japan, namely how lucrative it was for the Catholics, and how unfair it was for the Japanese. Blackthorn also mentions the Treaty of Tordesillas, and how Portugal thinks it should own Japan, and also talks about a grand Portuguese plan of conquering Japan through Christianity, which, come on John, is pretty ridiculous, though it does help him get onto Toranaga's good side. Let us now examine Toranaga, the big man. He is the show's equivalent to Tokugawa Ieyasu, and in some ways he is very much like him, but in others he is not at all. For example, Ieyasu was quite patient, which is something we see in Toranaga, but he was also power-hungry, whereas Toranaga seemed content with his position as Lord of Kanto, at least at the beginning of the show. Of course, by the end of the show, we see that Toranaga had a plan for seizing power. but we never learn if his intentions were these from the get-go, or if he adapted to the changing political situation. But while Toranaga, in the beginning, is shown as a man who doesn't thirst for power, the same can't be said for his arch-rival Ishido, who is seen as the one trying to scheme to control the government. But this contrasts with his real-life counterpart Ishida Mitsunari, who was not a power-hungry schemer, but steadfastly loyal to the Toyotomi clan. Just like the real-life Ishida Mitsunari and Tokugawa Ieyasu, Toranaga and Ishido are fated to clash at the Battle of Sekigahara. Although the Battle of Sekigahara is not depicted in the show, the characters' dialogue leads the viewer to believe that the outcome will be the same as in real history, and that Toranaga will prevail and become shogun. Finally, we will touch on our protagonist Blackthorn, who needs no introduction. He is the show's equivalent of William Adams, whose life we have already documented in one of our videos. We don't know if William Adams was as broody as Blackthorn, but given that Adams too was forbidden from leaving Japan, we guess that he was. Shogun has been received by the public with praise, and rightfully so. Most of the time, the show is historically accurate, with great attention to detail. It is not perfect. For example, Blackthorn's pistols are anachronistic, as that particular model would only appear centuries later. But its inaccuracies do not deduct from the immersion. The costumes and the settings are masterfully crafted, and the characters feel as if they belong in that time frame. It is not a one-to-one retelling of Ieyasu's story, yes, but it never aimed to be. The novel it is based on is historical fiction, not a chronicle. In the end, we think Shogun will successfully entertain with a thrilling story not only hardcore Japanese history enthusiasts, but also casual historical drama viewers. More videos that both review historical fiction and cover real historical events are on the way. To make sure you don't miss them, please subscribe and press the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we have started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.